Mighty Number 9, the Kickstarter disaster that pissed off a ton of backers, but in this video game court, it's innocent until proven guilty. Court is now in session for a highly anticipated episode of Innocent Until Proven Guilty. After countless delays and months of radio silence, Mighty Number 9 was finally released. And what a release it's been. There have been reports of backers receiving broken codes as well as various bugs and glitches needing to be corrected, and all of this was preceded by a boatload of negative reviews. It's hard to believe that the spiritual successor to one of the most beloved franchises of all time could be such a disappointing failure, but these allegations are too egregious to ignore, so I'm going to assume my solemn duty to try Mighty Number 9 for these offenses. Mighty Number 9 was released for PC, Mac, and a multitude of different systems on June 21st, 2016, nearly 3 years after it was publicly funded. It was produced by Concept, the studio founded by Keiji Inafune, the industry icon whose claim to fame is the classic Mega Man titles. Owing to its pedigree, Mighty Number 9 shares many traits in common with its predecessors, starting with the story. As per usual of that series, a peaceful society is suddenly rocked by a wave of violence caused by malfunctioning robots. Beck, the titular hero, is unaffected by the outbreak, so he's forced to fight his brothers and sisters in the ensuing anarchy. Concept's creation begins with an introductory level that teaches the basics to the player through cues that pop up on the screen. The control scheme is fairly standard for this style of 2D platformer and thankfully tight enough for the tough task ahead of us. Beck runs, jumps, and shoots a non-chargeable arm cannon by pressing the directional pad or analog stick B and Y respectively. However, a new concept that was added to the bag of tricks was the ability to absorb enemy energy or cells through the dash. As Beck continues to attack foes, they'll eventually change color, and a press of the R button when this happens will result in the weakened adversary being absorbed by the protagonist. The dash is essential for maneuvering out of tricky situations, garnering temporary boosts and sub-tank replacements called Excel Recovers, as well as maximizing boss damage, so I can't stress enough the importance of mastering this technique. Beck's assimilation ability is the key to fixing the disease, and he has to confront the other Mighty Warriors to gather samples for Dr. White. The locations that the Mighties reside in match their personalities, and they conform to the familiar archetypes of ice, fire, etc. Not surprisingly, there was a set path that's most efficient in defeating the bosses, but I didn't bother looking into it. I decided to wing it and experiment until I was successful, but I discovered that the optimal route contains an advice option which acts as a sort of signpost on the map. Plus, the revitalized comrades appear in the stages of the bosses who are weakened by their resurrection weapon. If that sounds confusing, just imagine that Woodman joined Rock in combating Airman. It's extremely clever, and I absolutely approve of it. It should be obvious by now that Inafune-san and the rest of the Concept team drew heavy inspiration from the Mega Man titles of the 8 and 16-bit era. The story and core mechanics feel right at home with the Capcom masterpieces that I grew up with, and the presentation emphasizes this connection. The graphics are admittedly not what I was expecting, especially since they so radically differ from the gorgeous mock-up pictures featured on the Kickstarter page, but the character designs are fantastic in spite of the dull static cutscenes. The music was composed by Manami Matsume and Takeshi Tateishi, the maestros behind the legendary Mega Man 2 soundtrack. While these songs aren't as memorable as those from their past collaboration, they still set the perfect tone for each step of Beck's mission. Between the eclectic mix of genres and the inclusion of a switchable chiptune score, there's plenty here to please a wide variety of audiophiles. Outstanding. response to the slew of problems that plagued Mighty No. 9, the only version that I have experience with is the Wii U disc, and the worst that I observed in the 4 days that I spent capturing footage was a single major instance of slowdown and occasional frame rate drops that didn't hinder my progress. I've heard that the original launch build was far less stable, and there were even false rumors spread about brick consoles, but an update was installed before I got to see it firsthand. I'll give Comcept props for dealing with these issues in a speedy manner, but they should have taken care of them months ago. Regardless, the Wii U version runs relatively smooth in its current state, so I'll chalk it up to the hassles of porting to so many systems with varying specs. Speaking of which, the Kickstarter page promised that Inafune's return to his roots would maintain everything that made his 8 and 16-bit titles magical, but transform them with fresh mechanics to fit the modern technology. This may have been a bold proclamation, but I believe that the finished product mostly lived up to it, at least on the Wii U. As mentioned previously, the gameplay stuck with the template established by Inafune's earlier work, making this a love letter to the NES hard era that requires quick reflexes and sharp wits to survive. As a part of the target demographic and a Mega Man veteran from childhood, I assumed that I'd have what it takes to effortlessly handle anything that the Concept team would toss at me, but I was wrong. Mighty No. 9 cranks the difficulty knob to 11, and even though I repeatedly got my ass kicked by Cryosphere Battalion and the rest of the Mighty crew, I couldn't have been happier about it. This was the kind of challenge that has been sadly missing from the recent console generations, and it will more than likely frustrate rookies and hardcore side-scrolling junkies, but I found it to be fair in its brutality. There are infinite continues and multiple checkpoints in each area that supply life-saving items. Plus, the default amount of lives can be increased from 2 to 9, so anyone with enough skill and determination can beat the game if they remain patient. As our hero faces his older siblings and snaps them out of their possessed states, the details of the plot will be pieced together. A TV broadcast during the tutorial focuses the blame for the incident on Dr. Blackwell, who had apparently attempted a similar scheme in the past, but a later conversation between White and Sonda sheds doubt on Graham's theory. White analyzes the collected data, and the spoiler warning is in full effect as it's revealed that the person responsible for this mess is none other than White himself. The data showed traces of a prototype he abandoned named Trinity. Trinity's activation disrupted the festivities at the Coliseum, and Gregory Graham alerts the doctors about the chaos at Cherry Dynamics. Beck and White travel to the factory to halt the manufacture of the rampaging robots, while Sonda and Call visit Blackwell at the prison. Call is quite different from the lead protagonist in that she was created by Dr. Sonda instead of White, and she lacks the distinct personality quirks of her peers.
Interesting.
What is it, Call?
I often detect an aversion to combat in Beck's vocal patterns, while I have no such reluctance. Question: why would Professor White include that hesitation in his design? It's illogical.
Call is armed with a laser gun and a hovering jetpack, as well as an energy barrier. Call has to find the security cards to gain access to Blackwell's cell, but the path is blocked by a giant metallic dog. Simply destroy its eye and force it to chew on explosive treats until it ceases to function. Meanwhile, over at the factory, Beck is assisted by his fellow Mighties, and he has to strategically utilize the powers at his disposal, which are activated via the X button to return the core to its proper working order. The core is guarded by a series of hulking Cyclops tanks. Dispatch the behemoths with a few battalion bombs and then blast the central target with everything you've got until it's neutralized. The scene transitions to the prison, where Blackwell drops the bomb that Graham was the true culprit responsible for the terrorist acts, and that he was arrested for opposing the Fiend's evil plans.
From Cherry Dynamics? What do you mean, activating her again?
Trinity, of course. Graham is obsessed with using her to disrupt the weapons industry. A fool. I stopped him last time. And what thanks did I get? Lifetime stay at this maximum security resort.
Blackwell warns that it may be too late to stop Trinity, and the assimilated Battle Coliseum indicates that this may be true.
It's already too late. Trinity cannot be stopped.
Whoa! Oh, peas and carrots!
Unfortunately, Beck has the heart and courage to make Trinity see the error of her ways, so Avi transports him to the source of the pandemic for the epic conclusion.
I understand, Professor. I'll do it. I'll save Trinity.
I know you will, Beck. I know you will.
The Battle Coliseum is without a doubt the hardest section of Beck's quest. The enemies are vicious, the platforming is aggravating, and hours flew by as I failed at the Trinity fight. I consider myself to be a pretty capable gamer, but this was almost too much for even me. With practice, I was able to consistently take out Trinity's initial puffball incarnation without breaking a sweat, but the acid-spewing flower from hell was the bane of my existence. It didn't help that I had to have both Excel recovers fully stocked in order to have any chance of defeating her, and the checkpoint bots constantly trolled me with completely useless items. Luckily, I'm blessed and cursed with a stubbornness to not give up so easily, and after 2 nights of attempts, I finally put an end to Trinity's rampage.
Come on! Step out of it! Now!
The structure collapses without her guidance, and the mighty numbers rescue their allies from being crushed under the rubble. The group rejoices as peace is restored, and a post-credits epilogue confirms Graham's suspicions that William White is really Bill Blackwell. Bill tells his father that the empathy that saved Trinity will improve the development of robots for decades to come, but the elder Blackwell believes it to be dangerous, setting up a potential future conflict among father and son.
Of all mankind.
You got lucky, that's all. And cleaning up your own mess doesn't make you a visionary. Besides, who can guarantee the behavior of robots left to their own devices, evolving on their own? This heart of yours is unnecessary, and worse, dangerous. I remain unconvinced, Bill.
Don't call me that. My name is William White. I'll show you. I'll show you and everyone else who doubted me.
Then only time will tell if this mighty number 9, this Beck, is a blessing or a curse.
Mighty No. 9's plot concludes on a rather ambiguous note, which I guess is appropriate considering the events that unfolded upon its launch. The pervading attitude is understandably fueled by the anger of thousands of neglected backers, but does that justify the hate towards the game itself? Let's find out in the breakdown! Mighty No. 9 had the potential to be amazing, and retro fanatics across the globe were salivating at the idea of a new Mega Man-esque adventure so much that they pledged $4 million to ensure Inafune attained his vision. $4 million may be a mere pittance in comparison to the current AAA blockbusters, but it certainly should have been more than enough for a project of this caliber to be completed without a hitch. Instead, the dream title that the backers had been anxiously awaiting was delivered in a nearly broken condition with abysmally long loading screens. This is inexcusable, especially coming off the heels of the cheaper budgeted instant classic Shovel Knight, and Concept should be held accountable for one of the biggest disappointments in gaming history.
Absolutely, Professor White. Anything we can do. Did you have a plan in mind?
Yes, we'll send Beck to track down all his fellow mighty numbers.
Great idea! Wait, what?
This is one of those rare occasions where I agree with a lot of the guilty bullet points. I said at the beginning of this video that the Kickstarter was a disaster, and I genuinely mean that. However, I was able to separate Mighty No. 9 from that catastrophe, and I had a blast zipping through the challenging stages with my trusty Wii U Pro Controller in hand. It's far from perfect, and I won't defend that a patch was required to bring it up to the present quality level, but the fact remains that Mighty No. 9 is a nostalgic trip down memory memory lane that did a great job of paying tribute to its 8 and 16-bit influences. I appreciated that the programmers kept the intense action of its predecessors intact, and I felt quite accomplished for beating the game without raising the number of lives and primarily relying on the standard weapon. Inafune-san and his crew have received a lot of flack for the perceived failure of Mighty No. 9, and while some of it is deserved, I honestly feel that the hate is unmerited. Concept promised to deliver an adventure worthy of its Mega Man roots, and minus a technical snafu or two, they totally succeeded. In the case of Mighty No. 9, I rule that the verdict is innocent, but with a stiff penalty. Before any of you form an angry mob and knock down my door, this verdict is just my opinion and applies specifically to the Wii U. I can't and won't comment on the quality or lack thereof on the PlayStation, Xbox, and PC. They could be terrible for all I know, and I'm sorry if that's the case, because I wish that everyone could experience the joy that I felt when I captured footage for this review. I'm not ashamed to admit that I've become a fan of Mighty No. 9. In fact, I downright adore it. I love the concept, the characters, the music, and everything else. I want to see a sequel in the future, but I hope that Inafune-san learns a lesson from the crowdfunding fiasco. If any of the backers are watching, know that you have my deepest sympathies. You guys should have been kept in the loop during the delays, and it's utter BS that you weren't given early access to the download codes. If I had to judge concepts solely based on their funding campaign, then they'd be guilty as sin. But I'm willing to pardon them since the game exceeded my expectations and Inafune owned up to the problems. I would normally say that I highly recommend checking it out, but I can't in good conscience until all of the bugs and glitches are fixed. I'll still suggest giving it a try due to the amount of content provided for the bargain price, including a retro skin, online co-op, and an extra plotline involving a really cool character named Ray. Anyway, now that I put my 2 cents in on this scandalous side-scroller, there's a Cygnus Destroyer top 10 brewing in my head that I'm really excited to work on. Be sure to come back for that, but until then, court is now adjourned! Thanks for watching, everyone. If you like what you saw and you want to see more, click any of the boxes on the screen right now and you'll be able to watch a few more of my videos. And if you haven't already, be sure to click that red box right there in the corner and that'll subscribe to the channel and you'll be able to keep up to date with all of my current content. Thanks again, everyone.